Whether you're dating, married, or in a committed relationship, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your relationship can help you strategize and figure out how to build a relationship you've longed for. This is where the Relate Relationships Assessment comes in. It's the most comprehensive relationship assessment in the world. It's research based on the major predictors of marital stability, and it's recommended by the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapists. Also, it's the one that my husband and I used when we were in premarital couples counseling. So for 20% off the assessment, go to relateinstitute.com and enter Polinsky20. Again, that's relateinstitute.com and enter the promo code Polinsky20 to get 20% off. Welcome to the Communicate and Connect podcast for military relationships with your host, Elizabeth Polinsky, a military marriage counselor. If this is your first time listening to the Communicate and Connect podcast, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe to make sure you get all our future episodes. We also really want to know what it is you love about our podcast, and if for some reason you're not loving it, we want to know that too, because we're committed to providing the best quality content to help you improve your relationships. Welcome back to the Communicate and Connect podcast. This is episode 33 on sharing personal experiences. We have a guest speaker today, Lisa Ligouri, and I'm going to let Lisa introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who she is and what she does.
Yeah, hi Liz, and hi to your listeners. It's such an honor to be here. I am very passionate about helping people understand the power of experience sharing versus advice giving in a number of situations. And I came to this kind of passion through being in business a number of years and then being involved in peer groups where we use an experience sharing format. And I experienced the connectivity that it creates and brought that back to my family and my relationship with my husband, and saw how it really, in that context, also brought us closer together and increased our intimacy. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about it today.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we're talking about this as a topic, because I think it is really, really relevant to couples, all couples across the board. I mean, I think any relationship, I don't know, unless I'm paying somebody to give me advice. If you give me advice, I'm kind of annoyed at you, So I think any relationship can benefit from this, but especially couples and families, and they're with military couples and families. They have so many unique experiences, and sometimes the family members feel kind of disconnected because they really can't relate to a lot of the service member experiences. And so I think this is what we're going to talk about today is a way to help facilitate the connection, the connectivity that you're talking about for anybody who's listening. Yeah.
I think it's so true. And as a CEO, I know I sometimes go off into my work world where I'm the problem solver. And then I come home and my tendency is to tell my husband how he needs to do things.
Yes.
Or tell him what my advice and my diagnosis is of his situation, and vice versa. So it's human nature. And I think it's been helpful for me to learn that there's another tool in my toolkit I can use.
Yeah. I can relate to that on a personal level as well. So I'll share this experience with you right now, since that's what we're talking about. But my husband's in the military, and there is such a logical problem solving focus with the military. And I was recently talking to somebody where it's like, okay, even though everything went well, we should think about how it should go better next time. So and here's more advice, even if it went well. So yeah. So tell us a little bit about your experiences and how how you came to become interested in this idea of experience sharing versus advice giving. Can you give us kind of the backstory?
I'd love to. I think it started when I was growing up, and I had a very alpha dad whom I adored. He was my hero his entire life, and he was a problem solver. And as I grew up, I had that model in my head. And then I started becoming involved in these peer groups where there was a very different format. And my family of origin also did a reflective listening seminar. And I didn't think I could get any closer to my father than I was. But when we started to practice reflective listening and experience sharing together and as a family, the safety, if you will, of sharing what we are going through just went through the roof, where we became each other's go to people. And
Mm-hmm.
the crux of the experience sharing is that as opposed to listening to someone and telling them what they need to do, it's listening to the feeling, reflecting and understanding that back, and then when the timing is appropriate, if they're receptive to a related experience, sharing something that's happened in our own lives that might be of relevance that that person can then draw on to make their own decision. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
tell you, you alluded to it earlier, but I think we've all had that experience where we're telling someone a problem we're having and we're really frustrated, and the person says, "Well, have you thought of this?" Or we're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thought of that. That won't work. Well, how about that?" Da 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 da. And by the time you get through all of their ideas, it's exhausting
Mm-hmm.
and you feel no more alleviated or understood versus having someone, even if they haven't been in the same exact situation, just share, it sounds like you feel X. It sounds like that's really frustrating. And if I might take a sidebar, when
Mm-hmm.
I was learning this, I kept thinking, well, I wouldn't feel that way as this person is feeling. How can I be honest and reflective at the same time? And through literally just sitting in pairs practicing this, we learned that we can still imagine how someone else feels or hear how they feel. So it might not frustrate me that the driver in front of me is slow because I'm a slow driver, but if it's bothering you, I can say that sounds like it really got under your skin. And just that little bit of reflection and human connection allows us to get in sync and kind of diffuses the emotionality that that person's feeling, as opposed to countering them. Don't feel that way. You shouldn't feel that way, which kind of
Mm-hmm.
gets each person amped up more in their own camp.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it really does make sense. And I was just thinking about how often I hear that driving example in the couples that I work with, and I've had that happen in my relationship too. So I can really see that. So there, and what I'm hearing and what you're saying is there is a process, sort of steps that somebody can go through to be a reflective listener and then share their experience.
Absolutely. This blew my mind because it seems so formulaic. It seems like it wouldn't work. But what we did is we paired off in pairs in our workshop, and we've done it since just to brush up, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But we pair off and say, something that's really bothering me right now is that my contractor is running over schedule. I'm stressed that he now there's going to be charges. And then the other person reflects back, boy, it sounds like you feel frustrated, scared. Did I hear you're feeling irresponsible? Just getting anywhere in the emotional ballpark starts the conversation. And then we reflect that back, and then we switch, and the other person shares something, and we try to name the emotion we think we heard. And it's might sound silly, but this is not my first instinct. My first instinct
Mm-hmm.
is to try to fix it or to tell them why they shouldn't let it bother them. And it just starts to initiate a practice of doing this. And then we'll even remind each other, hey, what I need right now is reflective listening. If somebody starts giving advice, and it's not feeling like what is most supportive at the time. So that's the
Okay.
first step. And then the second step is if there's an experience in my life that I think could be helpful in some way, is to then share that. And kind of the guideline for that is that it shouldn't start with a you, it should start with an I. And it
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be forward thinking, but backward looking. These are kind of indications that it's a true experience share, not a embedded advice. So it might be something like, gosh, Liz, it sounds so frustrating that you're dealing with this contractor. You're scared about the cost overruns. May I share an experience with you? And if you say yes, it might be something like, with my contractor, I was having overruns. And what I did is I sat down with him and I renegotiated so that I knew there was an end date. And if he didn't meet that end date, I would start to recoup some of my costs. As I'm sharing my experience, it's not to tell you that's what you should do. It's just to let you know. And sometimes I might share an experience that didn't work out, but it becomes a data point for you. But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't put us in the position where I know everything you don't know, and I'm telling you what you should do. If you don't do it, I'm offended. You might be offended because you're thinking, well, don't you think I thought of that? It really
Yeah.
puts us both in a position where we're each vulnerable with each other.
Yeah, and equals. It's much
Yes.
more of a we're equals versus versus the I know better than you and this is what you should do. It's almost
Yeah.
like kind of parent like. And at least for couples, nobody wants to be married to their parent. You know, they want to be married to a team member as somebody who's an equal. And so, either way, I mean, if you were on the person giving advice, oftentimes that doesn't feel very good in a couple relationship, even to be the one giving advice, because it sets up that stage for are you really a team member? Are you capable to stand on your own 2 feet type of thing? But then certainly it doesn't feel good in the reverse. So I like this idea of first even getting permission. Do you mind if I share this experience that I've had that may be related to what you've gone through? And then in the sharing of your experience, it's really just to give them more options. But the the responsibility of implementing is still on the other person.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So I like that. I was just thinking I like this process and I like that you have these steps for how to do it. So it sounds like step one is reflect or repeat back what I think you're feeling. Even if I would feel different, it doesn't matter how I feel. It's what do I think you're feeling? And then
hmm
ask permission to share a story that may be related to what you're going through. Share the story, and then is there another step after that, or
I think within the share the story, try to focus on I statements, past tense,
okay,
and specifics. I think that those tend to be very helpful.
okay,
Yeah.
okay,
And like you said, I think in vulnerability, not from a place of I know what you should do. Because even if
mm-hmm.
somebody's situation is remarkably similar to ours, everybody's different. And so to assume we know what someone else should do is a pretty big presumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, my I think like my ears perked up a little bit when you said the word vulnerability. My gut feeling on that is that that's part of what's really important for a feeling of the connection. I'm curious if, or wondering if you'll talk a little bit about how using this sort of experience sharing format does lead to connection and what you've seen about how that is related to feeling connected in relationships.
Yes, that is such a astute point, and I think the shared vulnerability really does build trust.
Mm-hmm.
And in my own relationship, even beyond whether it's advice give, a conversation around experience sharing or just any conversation, I'm finding that the more I say, I bring my husband just got back from 6 weeks away surfing, and I was feeling nervous that his feelings for me what might have waned while he was away.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know if that's the right word, but diminished while he was away. And I realized, why don't I just share that with him? And I went in the other room and I said, I'm feeling really insecure right now. But the conversation that we had around it was really powerful and connecting. And he ended up feeling like he's really important to me, that I don't
Mm-hmm.
want his feelings for me to erode. But it wasn't my first instinct, Liz. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to hold it inside, or maybe even think to myself, I don't need him. If that's what happened, it's going to be okay. And I thought, why is that my first instinct? But almost without a doubt, every time that I'm able to share vulnerably, I end up having a higher quality conversation, and I end up feeling more connected and stronger with that person.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate your willingness to share such a personal experience about, and it not just like there are lots of ways that experience sharing can come up, but it's such a vulnerable thing to also talk about my relationship, my marriage, and feeling insecure in my marriage, that I can relate to that. My husband is deployed right now, and I've had these same thoughts like, is he going to even like me again, be attracted and stuff when he comes back? But so you noticed that feeling on the inside, and you had the urge to keep it in, but instead you went and you shared about it with him in a vulnerable way, where you were talking about yourself and your experiences using the I statements and things like that. Yeah.
Yes, which I'm not always very good at, but the I
Mm-hmm.
statements, that's a great point. It wasn't, you seem like you don't like me, which I mean, I do it in a way that makes him feel defensive many times, but this one happened to be more well constructed, let me put it that way. I was able to share just from my point of view, my fear and what I was feeling, and it did open the door to his he gave him the opportunity to, like I said, share. Not only did he reassure me, which was wonderful, but it let him know that he was important. And I think each of these little mini victories helps me reprogram the way I'm wired, because it isn't my default to share when I'm feeling vulnerable.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is how, when that, I guess it's not the first instinct to be vulnerable. I mean, I don't know anyone who's like, let me be vulnerable in the world and open to being hurt, So I think that's such a human thing to not want to do that, I guess. And so I'm wondering, how did you get yourself to do that? Yeah.
Good question. We've been working on it. So we've done counseling at different times. We had a book, I think it was called Hold Me Tight. Are you
Yes.
familiar with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a workbook. So it's something we've been talking about. My husband also helps me a lot because he's very good at it. So he's kind of a role model and helps. I think when one person ups the game in terms of vulnerability, it helps both of us. So I've gotten to see him model that. And then yeah, it's just reinforcing every time we have a productive conversation.
Okay.
And it builds a little bit more trust, another brick, another neural pathway, if you will, that this is an option.
Yeah. Okay. So the practice and the repetition makes it easier each time.
Yes, and another thing I should mention is I've been journaling like crazy. And I think that's helped me connect to myself, to know, because sometimes I have this emotional knee jerk strong reaction and I don't know where it comes from. But when I'm able to slow myself down and through the pages of writing and just sitting quietly, get a little bit to the bottom of, well, what just happened here, then I'm able to communicate that to someone else.
Yeah. Okay. So there's also a lot of self-reflection that you do to pause and notice and think about what your experience is in order to share it with someone like your spouse. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
And it's such a work in progress.
Yeah.
These are some small wins, but there have been many, many more times that I didn't do this as constructively.
Yeah. Which I think is so normal and so human, and it is scary. It's scary to even myself look at my feelings of insecurity and acknowledge my own feelings of insecurity or the fears that I have, and then let alone go and be vulnerable to the person in this case that the fear is about. That's scary stuff to do. So it sounds like you began learning these skills in this reflecting workshop that you did with your family and with your dad, and then you've done this in peer groups, and you've also done it with your spouse. So you've had an experience with this in many settings, and it sounds like it felt connecting in each of those different types of relationships.
It has been. I don't think I've ever had it not increase connection and really be validating. Even though it's always been a risk, I don't feel like it's ever not been worth it.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I can see someone maybe who might be listening to this, and maybe whatever their life situation is, they might be like, well, is it going to be worth it? Is it going to be worth it to bare my soul and be vulnerable with somebody? But for you, it's only been positive. You've had connection out of it.
Let me back that up a little bit,
Okay.
because I might have overstated that. There have
Okay.
been in my key relationships, it's been very positive. There have been people I've dipped my toe in with increased vulnerability, and it hasn't felt safe for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason. Either they weren't able to match that or respond to that, or for whatever reason, it just didn't feel like I was getting anywhere, and I didn't continue down that path. So I think
Mm-hmm.
evaluating the safety of the relationship is probably part of my calculus subconsciously.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some wisdom in that, in what you're saying, because I'm just going to repeat the process that you just talked about. So you attempt some vulnerability, but you said you tip your toe. So maybe it's not like bearing your deepest darkest secrets and your soul to somebody, but you up the vulnerability a little bit and see how it goes with the person to determine if it's safe to continue being vulnerable. And part
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. And so part of how you determine their safety is, do they match my vulnerability? Do they meet me in the vulnerable place or not? Did I
Yeah,
understand that?
exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
And I think doesn't have to be, are we 100% and 100%, but is this person trying to work with me? Are they on the same path? Are they willing to try to engage in that way?
Yeah. And then I'm thinking that's when the big feelings of connection come, is when somebody is willing to engage and meet you in the vulnerable places.
Yes. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but in a number of times in peer groups and things that I'm in, the level of depth, let's say if 10 was the deepest, we're at a 5. And then someone steps it up and shares really from their heart. And all of a sudden, boom, everyone joins them. And that group becomes so much more powerful,
Yeah.
connected, deep. So sometimes it does take a little bit of risk. But I do think, as you said, it's wise to tread carefully and not be bearing our souls everywhere, but at times to go out a little bit on a limb and be the first one to be a little more vulnerable.
Hmm. Yeah. I like to hear about how you have done this in many relationships. I think obviously being a couples counselor, like, marriages are the thing that I think about like all day, every day. But when I switch my mindset from marriage counselor to military spouse, and thinking about all the times that the active duty service member is gone, and how often there are moves and the difficulty of being separated from family and friends and trying to form new friends every few years, and then also trying to somehow have support around raising children or support when partners are deployed. I was just thinking that this could be really useful for sort of developing meaningful friendships for the civilian spouses, or I suppose even for the active duty spouses as well. But like if you're moving or if you are kind of noticing more isolation, that if this is a way to jumpstart connectivity and connection, this idea of experience sharing, I could see that being really related to forming closer social networks and social bonds. Have you seen anything
Yeah.
like that?
And I can't imagine those challenges that are unique to military families. That it's quite something what a sacrifice this service is, and I'm so grateful for it. One of the things that we do in those same peer groups that use experience sharing is we have something called 5%. And 5% is a way of saying to one another, what we're going to bring to the group is the 5% best and worst parts of our lives that we don't share with the general public, if you will, that we can really bring here. And we talk about what has happened and then why it's significant to us. And sharing a 5% event really takes the conversation to a depth that's meaningful and significant. And you kind of can't help but build connection versus what could be the tendency, which is to stay on the surface with the easy stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great tool when getting to know people, because when we drop down into that, we're really talking about the human experience with each other.
Yeah. So I'm just as we're talking through this, this part was not pre-planned or anything. So we're thinking kind of on the spot here, but again, I might not want to share the 5% worst part of me or worst experiences with somebody that I just met yesterday. I might do the dipping my toes a little bit and dip a little bit more, see if they match me. If they match me, then I can go a little bit deeper and see if that mutual depth and connection forms naturally through that process.
And you mentioned something you said sparked something that is so foundational to these groups that I didn't share, but confidentiality is the bedrock of those groups,
Mm-hmm.
trust and confidentiality. And I'd say the mutual commitment to vulnerability is part of the trust, but the confidentiality, without that, this wouldn't work. And in a everyday scenario, while we can ask for confidentiality, I think that's something that we learn to trust over time. So, to your point, there's a progression to this, and I don't think it's something we can expect to have instantly, but certainly something to know is possible with a lot of investment in the relationship over time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have found this all very interesting, and it so fits with how I think about couples and marriages and helping couples reconnect and be closer emotionally. So I really like what we're talking about, but I feel like the way that you're talking about it makes it really digestible for people to kind of understand how would I actually do this thing that is experience sharing. I'm wondering if there are any other tips that you have for anybody who might be listening on how they could do experience sharing or when they might use it or just anything related to that.
I would say a great way is maybe to get our spouses and ask, hey, do you think that this would be something worth trying? And then
Mm,
even doing one little practice a week. which might seem forced at first, but starts to build the muscle. And then that, even in and of itself, could be a fun couple project where we're moving toward the same goal and we're enhancing our communication. And I think, like any skill, any tool in communication takes practice, even though you might not look at it like that. I mean, if you're learning to play baseball, you take out bats. So understanding it's not going to be a perfect process, but that some trial and error could help build a strength within the relationship that's well worth it.
Yeah, I like that. Trying to make it something that I practice and that I build up my skill set at, and that even if we start really small, it could make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if people wanted to learn more about experience sharing, how would they do that?
Yeah. Well, I have a podcast through my nonprofit, and it's at advicecolumn.com. And there's actually a free downloadable worksheet I just thought of as we were talking that is kind of 5 pitfalls to avoid when giving advice versus experience sharing. So that's one way. And then I'm always available to answer any questions about my experience. I'm not trained, I don't have any credentials, but I'm just out there in the world practicing and
Mhm.
happy to share my own experience anytime.
Okay, great. And how would someone find you if they wanted to learn more or ask you questions?
Yeah, they could find me through advicecolumn.com. There's an
Okay.
email on there, or at lisal.com.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I don't think I have anything else for us today. Lisa, do you have anything else for us?
I don't, but I'm so grateful for this opportunity
Yeah.
to speak with you, and I love what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I love doing this podcast. So thank you for being on it, because I think this is a really foundational piece for relationships on how to communicate in a way that does bring more connection. So, yeah, thanks for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe so you get all of our future episodes. Make sure to check out the show notes to sign up for our free 10-week relationship email course. This email course is really designed for people who are maybe having trouble with communication or connection in their relationship, and helping them develop some quick wins right away to start improving it. While I am a therapist, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered therapy. And it should also not be a replacement for therapy. If you think you need a professional of any kind, you should definitely go find one. Until next time.